Welcome back everyone. In the last few videos we did a lot of refactoring to embrace the tell don't ask principle. And now it's time for the big moment, creating a pull request. But what exactly is a good state for your code before you hit that submit button? We should do some cleanup, but how much cleanup is really needed? This is super important, especially if you work regularly on a code base. You want it to be clean and maintainable. Think of the Scouts rule. Leave the code in a better place than how you found it. So join me as I go through the final cleanups and explain all the tiny little details that will make your code base shine. Welcome to Frankly Developing. I'm your host Frank, and when we create a pull request, we need it to be focused on a primary goal or purpose. Ours was to adhere to the tell don't ask principles. Check out the other video on how we achieved that. Before we look at the code and check if there's something to clean up around where we worked on, don't forget to like and subscribe. And let me know your little tips and tricks in the comments below, how you achieved that shiny and awesome pull request. Okay, so let's take a look at the code and what we achieved. You remember maybe these enum values for the different game states? And we said it's a better idea to have an interface and actual objects, classes that do implement this interface for each of the game states to encapsulate them properly. And we seem to have succeeded most of the way, since 3 of these are unused. But if it's kind of unfinished now, if you see that there's 3 still being in use, so that's something we certainly want to look into. Then there's also this little warning here where it says oh, take a look at this. It's just a nullable annotation context. So maybe we start with that one, because that is like an overall setting. And I've shown that in a previous video that you may want to check out in more detail. But basically, we just go to the settings and enable the nullability. Now this is fine and just a normal, properly supported nullable. So what else can we do? There's a lot of other warnings on things like this. It's just initialized, it's now supposed to be nullable, so we noticed a few more problems around this nullability, which may be out of scope for our pull request. So depending on how much time we want to invest, this is not something to focus on immediately. When we look back at our main change in this update method, we already noticed something like this. It's actually never used. So we have this game state enum, but it used to be an output, and now we don't use it anymore because, of course, we just return the new state every single time as an I game state, not as the enum value, as the proper object for the next state of your program or game in this case. So how do you deal with that? Well, there's one very simple trick. If you work with JetBrains IDEs, you press Alt-Enter on any of these when your cursor's on it, and it says, oh, remove unused local variable. But the interesting point is that when you look at this interface, we have 6 different implementations, and each of them uses this parameter, or maybe not uses it. So let's take a look at a random one like the level select, and here it is, and it is being used and assigned to something. So is it really unused? Well, on the outside, where we call it, we don't use the value. So yeah, that part is unused. But here we seem to use the variable to assign something like the game state game, which is our play state. We have a replacement object that we actually now use as well and return that one. And similarly for the other position, we will find something equivalent, like, yeah, it sets the main menu enum in there, but it's actually returning our new main menu object. So this really does feel a little bit unused. Now if we go back and use this little trick and say Alt-Enter and then remove this, it's actually not doing a lot of stuff here. See, this is just removing the reference that we have here as a variable name, but it's still there, so not really what we wanted to do. So if we instead go to the interface here and say oh yeah, this is really never used by any code, get another try. And you can see now it's saying and update usages, which is a much more powerful version. So you'll notice this a lot when you clean up with the IDEs like JetBrains IDEs, which I personally am a really good fan of. All this stuff happens with Alt-Enter. You press the Alt key and Enter and you get these amazing menus. And most of the times you can just press Enter again and it'll make magic happen. Why magic? Well, let's take another look at our level select, because of course it used to have this parameter as well. Now it's gone. It's not there anymore. And there was an assignment here. Oh, it's also gone. And in the places where we returned these things, there was an assignment. And that is gone now. If you look into the history, that's all removed already. All of that is gone. And now, check this out. We just lost 2 of these references completely. Just like that, by pressing Alt-Enter. This is how you clean up very efficiently. It's not a lot of work. We spent all of the time explaining, but literally just pressed Alt-Enter and Enter again. And that was it. Then we waited for a second for the IDE to clean all of this up for us, which is really, really good. If you want to know other such amazing features, I already did a video, I'm going to link to you here, on JetBrains IDEs and how to make the most out of them. There's some really cool tricks that are possible. But now we already cleaned up 5 of the 6, so let's take another look. Like, how is this one still being used? And that is like the last usage, which is assigned to this one. And this one, it has a warning, which says it's assigned, but the value is never used. Well, if you look at the usages, that's the only line. Like literally, we just have a variable that's just there for no good reason. So in this case, I'm afraid the writer still doesn't support it. So we can not really remove it like this. We can do a refactor this and then do a save delete. It's a little bit hidden, but that's possible. And if you do the save delete, it also deletes the assignment. And there we are. That was it. 2 very simple changes. And the whole enum, that was the main purpose of our pull request, to move these enum values and using them to retrieve stuff from other classes, and instead switch that to a tell don't ask, where we tell the classes what to do. Use a polymorphism approach where we have an interface to use for all of these and we don't need to know the individual ones. All of this is now more or less completed cleanly. The only thing that's left to do is remove this unused enum and just be done with that. So it's a pretty nice commit here. So we remove the game state enum, since that is now completely useless. Okay, so the next and final thing we want to do is all these tiny little cleanups that just keep your codebase healthy. They don't take a lot of effort or thinking or significant changes or anything like that. It's just tiny little things. And I'll go through them very quickly and each time just explain you why the problem appears. So first of all, when I look at this codebase, in my tree of files, I have some red markers, and these are not typical. They depend on how you configured your IDE. But I have some of these things that I never want to see in my codebase because it's super easy to get rid of them. And if you just continuously do that, there's very little of them. So let's just fix these 3. First one is an unused import. Another unused import. And this one is something that's not used. Alt-Enter usually helps for each of those. And that's it already. Okay, and now we have one file, this non-sharp.cs file, where we did a lot of changes. So let's take a look at all the warnings. And we see there are 6 warnings here that we may want to address. First one is this cursor variable, which is uninitialized and just gets assigned in some different places. And you can see that in particular the update method is assigning it to this arrow variant, and there are other variants, but that looks like a good enough starting point as any. Done. That's a warning. The next one is interesting. We have this instance field here, which is static, and it's used and initialized with this, so our own object in a static field. That's kind of a smelly thing already, and it's actually used for this closed method to provide access to this exit method, which in turn is used by some crash handler here that calls this static one, and that's also all static, so that doesn't look very nice. So let's quickly redo that, and the idea is very simple. How do you avoid having these static things when all that's really happening is this method is being called? And here we initialize this crash handler stuff, so why don't we just pass it the method directly? That's all we need to do. And once you do that, you can use that action, call it, and you don't have the dependency anymore. It's unused. Now the next one is a little bit more work, but just the same of it again. There are several fields, since we enabled the nullable settings, that are now a bit problematic because they're not fully initialized after the constructor call. The game framework, of course, offers you the initialize method, but that is supposed to initialize your game, not the programmatic point of just your object being properly defined and valid, because that is always the purpose of the constructor. When you call a new non-sharp game, you want all the things to be valid and not need a initialize call to get at least some values, because there's still null at the point of the constructor returning. So simple things like this FPS counter, which is just a new object, there's nothing special about it, are delaying their initialization for no good reason at all. So we might as well do it here. And then the other place in the initialize doesn't actually need to do that anymore because we have that object already in place. And when you do that, you come back to this one and already get another suggestion. Why not make that read-only? Because it's never changing. Oh, that's an interesting fact. Cool. So now let's do the same thing for all the others. Normally when you do these kind of changes, you want to regularly run your tests to make sure it still works. There are no tests on this project, unfortunately, so we'll have to run it and see if we broke something. But if you've changed the initialization order and you see, oh, yeah, there's something going wrong. We get a null pointer exception here. Okay, let's see. Somewhere in the main menu. So this new is it's getting some static stuff here. So let's take a closer look to this whole main menu and why it's still needed at all, by the way, because didn't we just change before all of these things into iGameState objects? So why do we have that? Well, we need a current game state. Okay, and this one has been used kind of wrongly actually here in the new state. So rather what we wanted to do is check if the result is now the main menu and check this quit button, click on that one. And for the other remaining usages, that was it. So now we can maybe get away with starting in a null current state, which of course we don't need for the nullable, and take a look if that makes any problems for us in terms of the usage. Because now we have to be careful here since we do update. Now we have a better time to delay our main menu part to move it to this one here. Where else could the null be a problem now? Well, sure, on the draw, oops. on the draw part. Yeah. But that's about it already. So let's give it another try. The sprite batch needs this graphics device, which is not yet available in the constructor. Now that seems to be more something that you have in your game science. So again, let's check how's the sprite batch being used. Oh, that one is really drawn out. So this is a bigger one to actually clean up. That would be a separate one on its own. We don't really want to do that. So that's kind of killing the scope of what we do, which isn't a big problem at all. Like if you run into this, you just go back to where you've been before. And now of course we have this warning again, but only for this one field. So if we want to do some rework of this, we can do so in the future and just think about how can we deal with this sprite batch differently. We don't have to force it into this PR, and yeah, that was it. All the rest is good. And that is quite interesting. It happens a lot. So just to recap, what did happen there? We tried to just get rid of a few warnings. One of them we found to be really problematic to quickly change, but the others actually led us to find a much better way to deal with our code and completely eliminate these variables here. Like we didn't need the we didn't need these main menu and editor at all anymore to be available as fields here and initialized already at this point. So it's all working without these variables, which is now not just a warning, it's much cleaner code that we get as a result. Okay, so let's leave that one warning and take a look at the rest. And here we have, oh, a nullability problem again. So the do text input is getting an option sender, which really should be like a nullable sender, because all of these events in C# can be sent from a null. Don't need to pass a sender object. Yeah, but that kind of changed through things. Now, if you have nullable enabled on a legacy project, you just suddenly enable it. This is what you get yourself into. You get a lot of these warnings because some other place is basically called through an event handling as well. So it should also have the thing here. And then you see how it cascades. Like as soon as I place this question mark, all of these appear again. And you have to go into these, do it again, and the next one. Oops. Do it again, and the next one, do it again. Oops. Do it again, and then, oh, well, the warning's gone, but so is like the actual usage here. And this is being called in different places. Each time it's passing in the sender, which is not even used. So you might actually think about completely removing that and cleaning it up. And you go back to where you came from and you realize, oh, it's not even needed anymore. Let's clean that up. And now we go through all the others in a similar fashion. When we come back to the very beginning of the do text input, we realize that the sender isn't even used at all. So instead of having a warning for a nullability, we just completely eliminate this variable everywhere in the codebase. And we're down here at the final warnings. Very simple one. Possible loss of fraction. Yes, this is like an integer. The bounds width is an integer as well. So if you divide this by 2, you don't get a something 0.5, which means you're stuck with integers, which might be okay, but then there's immediately like a floating value multiplied. So you really want to have floats apparently, then just do get floats properly. And we're done. Only one warning left. That might be well out of scope for our current situation. Something you might want to continue on in your Codebase later at another stage. When you're cleaning up this class even further, and you realize like how else can you deal with this sprite batch that's used in different places here to draw something, whereas just in terms of the responsibility of this class, shouldn't be here in the first place, because it's the base game class that coordinates these things, kicks off stuff. It shouldn't do the actual drawing calls. Let's summarize what we did for this pull request. First, we focused on the main goal, cleaning up the enum usages and achieving the actual goal of removing it entirely. Second, we eliminated hard warnings. Based on how you configure your IDE, these shouldn't be a lot. You regularly clean all of these up, that's why you configure them to show up as errors. And third, we cleaned up as much as feasible in the main files we worked on. Apply this approach to your pull request and you'll see your code base staying really healthy. Actually doing this takes just a few minutes once you're used to it, and don't have someone like me explaining every little detail. I hope this was interesting to you and you learned a thing here or there. If you enjoyed this video, you might also want to check out my other code reviews and of course subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, have fun developing.